I was recently watching the Back to the Future series, something that I've done hundreds of times. And as I was watching this scene from the third movie, I had an epiphany. I realized that this scene revealed a hidden McFly family secret. Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the GeneaVlogger, and on today's video, I'll be discussing how Marty McFly's parents are cousins. This scene from the third movie starts with Marty McFly waking up in a dark room, calling for his mother, and then being consoled by a woman who sounds like Marty's mother, albeit with an Irish accent.
I dreamed I was in a Western. I was being chased by all these Indians and a bear.
Well, you're safe and sound here now at the McFly farm,
Causing Marty to burst awake. It is then revealed that Marty is at the home of his second great-grandparents, Seamus and Maggie McFly. What makes this scene so revealing is that Maggie McFly is played by actress Lea Thompson, who also portrays Marty McFly's mother, Lorraine Baines McFly. But Maggie is an ancestor of Marty's through his father, George, not through his mother, Lorraine. This indicates to me that Lorraine Baines must be related somehow to Maggie, which also means that Lorraine Baines and George McFly are cousins. I do want to note here that I definitely understand that the main reason Lea Thompson is portraying both characters is because they want the continuity with the whole wake-up scene that was in the first movie and the second movie. In the first movie, Marty wakes up in 1955 to a teenage version of his mother, and then in the second movie, Marty wakes up in an alternate 1985 to an alternate version of his mother. So obviously, Lea Thompson is the best actress to choose to portray that scene. On the official Back to the Future website, they actually explain, Leia plays Maggie because we didn't want to make a Back to the Future Part 3 without having Leia in it, especially in a Mom Is That You scene. Of course, we thought about whether it made any sense. Obviously, Maggie McFly and Lorraine Baines cannot be blood relatives, but we did come up with a satisfactory answer. It's a well-known adage that men are attracted to women who remind them of their mothers. Clearly then, when Seamus married Maggie, that ensured that the McFly men would have a genetic trait that attracted them to women who bear a resemblance to Maggie or Lea Thompson. Even Jennifer is the same physical type. Now, in my opinion, I think this is a really lame answer, and in all honesty, kind of a cop-out. And I highly disagree with the statement that obviously Maggie McFly and Lorraine Baines can't be blood related. As someone who has seen thousands of family trees, if not tens of thousands of family trees, I actually think that it's the opposite in that it is much more likely that they would be related in some way. Historically, it is something that happened a lot with people marrying their cousins, and especially considering that Lorraine and George would have to be more distant than first cousins. And as I go through the video, I'll explain a lot more that should hopefully make it much clearer about why this seems like such a possibility versus a genetic predisposition to liking women like Lea Thompson, which talk about oversimplifying genetics. But when we look deeper at how George and Lorraine might be related, we need to build a family tree for Marty McFly. When I first started researching the McFly family tree and trying to build it, I soon learned that there was a lot more than just the three movies. There was a TV show, video games, comics, musicals, and much more that expanded on the McFly family. For this video, we're mainly going to focus on what's revealed in the three movies, but I will also be including some names and basic information that is revealed in some of the other media. I also learned that there was a novelization of all of the movies, and apparently that actually gives a lot of birth dates for these characters, so I will be utilizing those in the analysis of the family tree. One other thing that was important in building this family tree was this photograph of William McFly's family with the caption, William McFly, a first-generation American with his immigrant parents and his own wife and children, pose in front of their farmhouse. Note the stove at left, circa 1910. Looking into this photo, I found the Back to the Future wiki listing it as circa 1902. While the photo caption says circa 1910, I actually believe 1902 is closer to the correct year. If we consider the context of what we know about the family, along with the unknown family members we see in the photo, it makes the most sense to me to be about 1902. The main reason being that Arthur McFly, the father of Georgia McFly, is William McFly's oldest son who was born in 1901. So if the boy to the right of William is Arthur, this would date the photo closer to 1915 or later, because the boy seems to be at least 14 years old, if not older. I also think the clothing looks much more like turn of the century than the mid-19 teens. Granted, it isn't that big a difference in style. And if he isn't William's son, then the girl can't be William's daughter because she looks older than the other two boys, and a girl can't be the oldest of William's children because Arthur is the oldest of William's children. The older boy on Maggie's lap seems to be about 3 or 4 years old, while the baby in the arms of William's wife Eliza seems to be about a year or less. Either could honestly be Arthur, but I have a feeling it is more than likely the youngest in Eliza's arms. And while we don't know who all of these other people necessarily are, I'm going to assume that they are likely the other children of Seamus and Maggie McFly. I'll also assume estimated birth years for these siblings of William based on context. So with all of that considered, here's my version of Marty McFly's family tree. I have yet to find any McFly family trees like this one, especially taking into consideration the unknown family members from that photo. Although there is a lot of fan-related material out there, so maybe very similar trees are out there that I just haven't found yet. But now that we have our tree built, we can start to hypothesize how George and Lorraine might be related. And from my analysis of all of the information, I was able to come up with 4 main theories that I believe are the most likely scenarios for George and Lorraine to be related. The first theory: Lorraine also descends from Seamus and Maggie McFly. If that is the case, then Seamus and Maggie would have to be Lorraine's great-grandparents, which would make George and Lorraine second cousins. If we assume that all of the characters portrayed by the same actor or actresses are descendants or ancestors of each other, then this theory is the one that makes the most sense, as Lorraine would have to be a descendant of Maggie. Having said that, I don't personally make that assumption, and I see it more as indicating they are close relatives. So this isn't the theory that I think is truly the most likely, but it's probably the second most likely in my opinion. But if this theory is correct, there are 2 main truths we can rely on to create a more succinct idea of exactly how the tree connects. First, William Sean McFly had a younger sibling who is the biological parent of either Sam or Stella. Age-wise, this would definitely fit, since the presumed siblings of Williams, even from the photograph, would be the right age to have a child in 1910 or 1915. Well, all except the youngest brother, who was born circa 1898, although he still could have fathered Stella in 1915. Secondly, the sibling must be a sister, since the sibling can't be the father of Sam or Stella, otherwise they would have the McFly name as well. I guess it is better to say it's most likely going to be a sister instead of a brother, because it is possible that Sam or Stella didn't know their biological father for some reason, and thus didn't have the McFly name. And I guess it is possible that Stella may have been a McFly and that's her maiden name, but I imagine if that's the case, then that probably would have come up from Lorraine during that whole scene where George said that she's his density.
Yes, I'm George. George McFly.
Aren't you my cousin? My mom was born McFly. Speaking of which, the thing I think that makes this scenario less likely is the Baines family's lack of knowledge of George McFly or the McFly family name. Hill Valley doesn't seem that big of a town, and from various posts I've seen on Reddit and Facebook, many people estimate it to be somewhere around 3,000 to 5,000 people. So I would assume a family in a small town would be especially knowledgeable about their second cousins or closer in the same town, especially being forced to interact much more often. But it is also possible that the McFly family is a lot bigger than we learn about in the movies and other media, and there could be a ton of cousins, if not possibly hundreds of cousins in Hill Valley, and thus it'd be kind of hard to keep track of everybody. And we also never see anyone from the Baines family meet George McFly or even hear his name other than Lorraine. So we never even see Lorraine's parents react to the name McFly, which, if that is a family name that Lorraine doesn't know, it'd be much more likely that her parents would know. The next three theories are based on the idea that Lorraine isn't descended from Seamus and Maggie, but instead descends from one of Maggie's siblings. In Back to the Future 3, we really don't learn anything about Maggie's backstory other than the fact that she and Seamus recently moved to Hill Valley. It's very likely and historically accurate that Maggie and or Seamus would have siblings that came and settled in Hill Valley because they would have a sibling that's already established there. Something that's very common and known as chain migration. In all honesty, it's even possible that Seamus and Maggie had a bunch of siblings and even possibly cousins who moved out to Hill Valley, and thus there would be a lot of relatives to Marty in Hill Valley. Within these theories of Lorraine descending from one of Maggie's siblings, the first one we'll discuss is the idea that Maggie's sibling is a grandparent of Lorraine Baines. If this is the case, Lorraine and George would be second cousins once removed. This would also mean that Lorraine likely descended from a younger sibling of Maggie's. Since we don't know Maggie's maiden name, this also leaves a possibility that Maggie's sibling could be either the father or mother of Sam or Stella. If it's Sam's father, that would mean Maggie's maiden name is Baines, which would make sense since it seems that surname can be found in Ireland, although it seems to be much more of an English, Scottish, Welsh surname. And personally, ranking this out of all of the four theories, I would rate this the second to last. The next theory is that Maggie's sibling is a great-grandparent of Lorraine's, which would make George and Lorraine third cousins. When I first looked at the family tree, I felt like this was the most likely scenario, and I still honestly lean towards it being the most likely. For one, it makes a lot of sense that George and Lorraine's families wouldn't know about each other at a third cousin distance. In my experience working on people's family trees, it is very rare for people to know about their third cousins. In this scenario, Maggie's sibling could be younger, could be older, although likely born sometime in the range of 1845 to 1865. The last theory I have is that Maggie's sibling could be a second great-grandparent of Lorraine's, which would then make her and George third cousins once removed. In this scenario, it would have to be an older sibling of Maggie's, otherwise it would be 3 straight generations of having children before the age of 18 or younger, which I guess that is possible, but not very common. And at that sort of distance, it makes a lot of sense that Lorraine and George would have no clue that they're related, let alone even their parents knowing. But I think this is the least likely of the 4 theories, mainly because it's such a distance of relation, it feels less likely that Lorraine would share such a strong resemblance to Maggie, since they'd be second great-grandaunt and second great-grandniece, so I think this one is a little too distant. When researching this video, I found tons of posts dating back years discussing the same idea of this video, that Lorraine and George are related because Maggie is played by Leah Thompson. And I even found a recent post just 4 days before shooting this while I was still working on the script. I noticed that a lot of the people were theorizing that the distance of relation between Maggie and Lorraine was much more than what I think, and some pointing mostly towards a aunt or uncle of Maggie's being the descendant of Lorraine, which I personally think that's just too distant to make sense. And then I also noticed a lot of people just hating on the idea, seemingly because they just hated the idea of incest and being inbred and all those sorts of things, even though it's a very common thing in everybody's families. You go back far enough, you start finding that people that were first cousins were marrying each other, let alone people that are second, third, or fourth cousins marrying each other. They might not even know they're cousins. I even replied to a few folks with some of my opinions, and let's just say they were not very well accepted. And while the official explanation basically dwindles down to McFly men are genetically predisposed to liking women like Leah Thompson, I definitely like my version a lot better. But I'm curious, what do you think? Are they cousins? Are they not? Maybe a different relation than what I have? Comment below and let us know. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like, give it some hype points, and be sure to subscribe. And if you want to see more videos talking about genealogy stories, such as when I identified Max Miller's great-grandparents using DNA in the paper trail, you can check that out right here. Thank you to my Patreon patrons and YouTube members.